Hello, World Civ 107. Welcome to week 9. Later on, I might have a discussion with us all to talk about more about what's happening. I do realize that it's very hard to concentrate on school right now when there is a serious crisis. And yes, I'm talking about the coronavirus, okay? It's obvious that some of our politicians took this lightly initially, and now nobody seems to be. And I think we're all in this hoping that the leadership in this country actually makes the steps to help us all out with this. So I understand that we're really struggling with this one right now. And so, I just wanted to put that out there. Now, having said that, the things that we're going to be seeing here in 2020, the things that we've been seeing, the history that we've been covering, and what especially we're going into, are so relevant to what we need to have an understanding of right now. Okay? So, we know, as I discussed earlier, that the question of Bernie Sanders being called a democratic socialist and what that means to communism and the Russian Revolution and all of that has been a topic. There has also been, although you hear less of a topic, of the president being accused of being a fascist, which we will as we're going over this hasn't really been a topic, but I just want to say something. When I was in Europe, that's how many Europeans saw it. Now, I'm not saying this to be divisive for you and my students and myself. What I'm trying to point out is that Bernie has been accused of being of the lineage going back to the Bolsheviks by his enemies and or critics. And Trump has been accused of being a fascist by his critics. Part of that has been that Trump has made a quote from Mussolini and has had a lot of support from white nationalists and people who self-identify as fascists. Bernie Sanders did compliment Fidel Castro's literacy, and he did spend some time in the Soviet Union, and that's some of the reasons why people question things about Bernie Sanders. There are people who have ways to explain the position of Bernie Sanders and dealing with those topics, and Trump has supporters that try to address those other things that I mentioned. But the bottom line is what we're seeing happen, and this is what I'm trying to get you all to understand, as opposed to try to instigate something, a bias on my part to all my students, is that the dramas that took place in World War I and World War II are still in effect being manifest in our political discourse. And you'll see that more as we slide into the drama of the Cold War, is where that really gets apparent to where we're at now with everything. And I also want to point out something too. You'll notice the way I do approach this section is a little bit odd, in that I almost downplay World War II, in the sense that I don't cover in great detail the rise of Hitler, the Holocaust, Stalin, and the purges, and the gulags, all those kind of things. It's not at all that I think that those histories are irrelevant. Not at all. But you get so much information about that from U.S. history classes, from Western Civ, and many documentaries. You never, and I already see this in the discussions, you never, ever, ever hear about India's involvement in World War II and the extent in which Indians were participants in World War II as colonial subjects. You don't hear about Africa and the effects of those wars on Africa or the Middle East. So I wanted to really make the World War I and II aspect really, really stand out, so that you get it through your minds, get away from this Eurocentric, American-centric view of the world. Because this, just like with this virus, You can't close off one part of the world and ignore and try to understand or be okay in the part of the world you're at. We're all on planet Earth, and a lot of these histories are shared, and there is so much propaganda that mutes real history. And the fact that non-European nations had so much participation and cost to their own lives and their own nations during this time, it's unacceptable that my class is going to be exposing you to new information. Okay? That's just something that I really need to make clear about. But that doesn't mean, again, here's what I want to also point out. Lenin and Stalin in particular are very controversial figures. Obviously, Mussolini and Hitler are. You should study and research about these characters, and you should know about how their ideas translated from their words and what they said on paper and what happened in reality. Now, in the case of Hitler, it was very obvious. You look at Mein Kampf, if you read his work, he blames everything on the Jews. He's very racist, and he's an ultra-nationalist. And he blames Jews for communism, the Social Democrats, and for corrupt banks. Everything in society gets blamed on them. And this is a point that I want to make very extra clear. Hitler was not a socialist from the left. This is a current myth, somewhat talked about a little bit in the last section. At the time that Hitler was in existence, socialists were popular. Mussolini was a socialist, and then he switched to being a far right-wing nationalist. Hitler basically used the word socialist as a way to seduce other people from socialism into his ultra-nationalist camp. There's nothing socialist about the economic policies of almost anything that Hitler did, despite what you see memes on Facebook. And but it is confusing because he used the term. And Julius Evola, this Italian fascist writer, he was never officially a part of the party. He did an analysis of Mussolini and Hitler after the fall of both regimes. And this was a man who wrote on behalf of, he was in favor, he was a far right-wing thinker. And he criticized Hitler for using that word socialist as well. But essentially, he knew that Hitler was on his team. And same goes for Mussolini. So if you have any questions on that, let me know. Then I want you to pay close attention to also the Madison Square Garden little clip I have, where American patriotism gets used at that time to be mixed into a far-right ideology that the Nazis had. So that also shows you that's not a part of the left. If you look at that imagery and the way that they talked about, invoked American nationalism, and even putting George Washington, a huge picture in the background mixed with Nazi flags. That was quite mind-blowing, actually. So, and then I again, what I want you to also remember as we move forward, and I'm going to end this lecture here, is that for all of the problems of Stalin and the Soviet Union, we're going to start seeing in the Cold War that many third world nations are going to gravitate towards being communists. And I want you to remember something. They were all under the authoritarian, one could say totalitarian, dictatorial rule of Western nations. Look at the Belgians and the King Leopold and the Congo. Look at what happened to other parts of Africa and India during World War I and World War II. We think of World War I, and in particular World War II, as the free world against authoritarianism and dictatorship, and we kind of look at it in a Private Ryan, oversimplified kind of way, where of course the Americans are the main heroes of the entire show. But for people who were in India or other countries that were forced to be dragged into the European war, Russia is going to be the really only viable alternative for a nationalist that wants to make their country independent of a foreign power. So if you are a person who sympathizes with having a 4th of July where we're independent of the control of a foreign nation, realize that it was the democratic West that imposed itself on a good chunk of the world. And that's why they were able to look at the Soviet Union as redeemers. Now, some argue that the Soviets themselves ended up playing some of the same kind of roles that the democratic West did, but pretending to be in the name of something that's different. That's something I want you to decide and look at as you study this history. But again, this is a very, very important history to understand. And later on, we will be able to know how to understand China better. Since China is a big topic, we will cover that at a later time. And also, I want you to just realize that China has changed a lot from the time it even had a communist revolution. But that's a whole other topic. Okay, look, I'm done. This interview's long enough. Keep calm, keep healthy, but also take care of each other. And we're going to just hope, again, that we have the proper leadership to deal effectively with a very serious set of issues. And as we're learning in our class, this is humans have went through some drama, and they get through it. And so we're just going to focus on the get through it part. All right. Contact me again if you need anything, and I always recommend texting and calling me if you want a quicker response. Have a good week.